Yo, what's going on, everybody? This is Nothing But Bangers back with a Marvel Snap video. We've got a new card releasing, or it might already be released depending on when you watch this video. It's going to be a interesting card called Sage. I'm going to give you a few deck lists and tell you how testing went when I tried to simulate this deck. So this was a really interesting card because, for one, you could kind of simulate it by using Wolfsbane, which is what I did, and I'll tell you how it went in just a moment. So let's get to it. So I'm going to go over just a few deck lists, and I'm going to kind of start with the obvious and then kind of go to the other ideas that I either tested or have theory crafted. There's only one deck that I theory crafted because I technically I don't own Havoc, so I couldn't really test that one. But let's start with the one of the first obvious deck choices, which is Negative Sage. I tested this for a few games, and to be real honest, I'm not a huge fan of Mr. Negative. It just feels like if you don't draw Mr. Negative by turn 2, 3, or 4, you just pretty much just like retreat. And so it's not very fun for me to play. And also in testing, when you know that that's kind of the case, it's really hard to get a real good grasp on how Sage kind of factors in. But this is just kind of an idea of how the turns would work, how the matchups would look. Basically, I think one of the games, I ran into Armor. So that's obviously a big card that you want to try to avoid. Obviously, Cosmo is a pretty big issue as well. But when you take a look at this deck, it just kind of boils down to, in my opinion, did you draw Mr. Negative early? And if you drew Mr. Negative early, just to be real honest, you're probably winning with the other cards in the deck. The Knolls, the Arnim Zolas, the Black Panthers, the Iron Mans, or the Iron Man Mystique. Sage is just kind of, it feels, if I'm frank, it feels a little bit more of a win more card. And kind of just, again, this is pretty much a one-trick pony. If you don't draw Mr. Negative, I think most of the time you're just going to lose this deck if lose with this deck. So yeah, that's just kind of how I feel about that. Moving on to the typical kind of Wong deck that you've been seeing a lot of, or maybe you haven't, I don't know, but I played a lot of this list, minus Sebastian Shaw, minus Sage. I think I was playing something like I think I was playing USA Agent, and I think I was also playing Sarah. So USA Agent and Sarah before I added Sebastian Shaw and Sage. So basically, this is going to be your standard Surfer deck for the most part. You're going to try to hope that maybe Sebastian Shaw can win a lane by itself. The only thing that you're going to run into is it's going to get Shang-Chi'd sometimes, and that's going to really stink. So you got to kind of watch and play around Shang-Chi a little bit if you can. The way that Sage fits into this deck is you're going to see Sage come down on that last turn a lot of the time. And I call this greedy because, again, you're being greedy hoping that you don't run into Leech. That's the big elephant in the room with this card. Leech is going to kind of warp a lot of these on-reveal decks out of the game for a little bit, the way that it's currently playing. And you can already see its play rate increased. In some sites, it's gone from 11% upwards to 20% in just the week that we've seen so far since it's been buffed. And again, 4 cost, meaning that when it comes down on turn 4, it's going to render a lot of your hand pretty much inert, right? It's not going to be able to do much. You're not going to be able to pop off much because a lot of your on-reveals will be gone. So in this deck in particular, when you get leeched, it's pretty much, you're pretty much retreating there. So my whole thought process with this deck would be, if you don't get leeched by turn 4, obviously turn 5, that's great, and you can probably pop off. But if you get snapped on turn 3 going into turn 4, you can pretty much anticipate that if the other deck can play Leech, it's probably playing Leech, and you should probably retreat. That'll save you some cubes. Basically, you're just trying to play the matchups and play the games where the deck that you're playing against doesn't have Leech. If it has Cosmo, you can still kind of play around it. Obviously, that's going to stink. Obviously, running into Enchantress on your Wong, whenever you try to Wong and Mystique and kind of pop off there, is going to kind of stink. But again, your big banes of existence when you're playing this deck is going to be getting snapped on turn 3 going into turn 4 because they're about to leech you, or turn 5, turn 6 getting Enchantress on your Wong. But if you can run away from those cards, or maybe you can kind of win priority, that way Cosmo doesn't impact you sometimes that much, you can definitely win a lot of games with this deck. But again, You're just being super greedy, saying Cosmo doesn't exist, Enchantress doesn't exist, and Leech doesn't exist. And you'll steal some games. You'll get some really big numbers. Again, Magic is there to extend the game, so that way you can have that extra turn to set up your pop off. Luke Cage and Hazmat, that's pretty much self-explanatory. But if you see your opponent play Luke Cage, you're going to want to shy away from that strategy. Obviously, Absorbing Man is going to have great synergy with Brood, but I would also say that Absorbing Man has some good synergy with Sage too if you play an early Sage. So again, Sage in the Wong lane is going to be where you're going to want to pop off. So that way you're hopefully, ideally, you have your lane with Brood, your lane with Absman that copied Brood, and then in your third lane you're going to have that Wong Mystique Sage combo, however you want to, and then Surfer obviously. But that's going to be kind of the way that you're going to want to set things up, and you're going to be able to win all three lanes if you don't get countered. But again, this is the ultimate greed lord deck. Now obviously you can win a lot of cubes, but be sure to retreat whenever you smell Leech, whenever you get snapped on certain turns. But you can win through Enchantress, and you can win through Cosmo. Now, this is another list that I tested. This was the first list that I tested. And again, I played Wolfsbane in place of Sage. There were a couple times where Sage would have had more power than Wolfsbane, and that's something to definitely pay attention to. However, I will say this. Red Hulk makes playing High Evolution feel so bad because you want to get your Cyclops triggers. You want to get your Misty Knight, your Sunspot. You want to get those triggers. And what ends up happening is you see Red Hulk start to grow turn 1 or turn 2, and you're just like, okay, well now I've got to spend all my mana because a 13 power Red Hulk is pretty tough. But once it gets to 17 and 21, the game is a lot harder to win. So I also found that when I was playing this list, I was winning a lot of games because of Leech. I wasn't necessarily winning because Sage popped off or Wolfsbane popped off. I was winning because Leech came down on curve, turn 4. It made a lot of their hands blank, and then I was able to kind of control and maneuver my cards the way that I wanted to so I could win those games. So again, looking at this list, if you run into Red Hulk, it's just going to feel bad. The upside I would say is Leech doesn't hurt this deck as bad because your Red Guardian's coming down earlier, usually your White Widow's coming down earlier, and then sure, they may hit your Sage, but you can win with other cards. So again, one of the big synergies that you're going to see in the next few decks is going to be White Widow and Sage, which should be pretty obvious, right? You're adding a 2 power, a negative power, and then your Sage. So right there you're getting 2/4 you're getting 4 power for 3, which isn't great, but if they play into that lane, which sometimes that happens, right? They see the White Widow, so they try to play into it, start trying to fill it up, and then your Sage can pop off there and get hopefully at least a 3/6, right? And sometimes it can go even higher depending on when you play your Sage. But again, playing this deck, it just feels really bad running into Red Hulk. Obviously, armor is there to try to protect some of your big cards or protect your Sage. And also one of the things to pay attention to is look at the distribution of powers. You've got your 2 power Misty Knight, you've got your 2 power White Widow, right? But then you start seeing 3 power armor, 3 power Red Guardian, and then you got 2 4 powers with Cyclops and High Evolutionary, and then you've got A-Bomb, She-Hulk, and regular Hulk, all different powers. So you're kind of spreading your powers out. Obviously, Leech 2 power 2, so that you could throw that in there. But you're kind of spreading your power out, so that way you can try to get triggers off your Sage. Overall, again, I felt like I was winning more because of Leech with this deck. Going into Patriot Sage. So this deck was also really interesting because sometimes when you're playing against clog decks, you can clog yourself first, and that kind of throws off their strategy. Also, the on reveals in this deck, if you notice, a lot of them are played before turn 3, right? I can play Squirrel Girl before turn 4. I can play Brood on turn 3. I can play Sage on turn 3 and still get pretty good value for all those cards. Also, Mystique and on reveal, I can also use that to copy. It's not going to feel great, but you can use it to copy a Dazzler. If it's turn 4, you can use it to copy a Patriot if you just play Patriot. So again, you want to, in my opinion, you want to mitigate the risk of running into Leech while also still putting out good cards that are still solid on reveals. And that's what this deck does, right? this deck is going to, it's going to spread out the board. It's going to make Mockingbird cheaper than 5. It's going to go ahead and take advantage of on reveals that trigger before Leech comes down and can potentially wreck your game plan. So this is basically rendering Leech into, hey, maybe it's only going to hit my Sage. If it hits my Sage, well, guess what? Now my Patriot's going to pump it. So if I wasn't able to play the Sage into a lane where I thought it was a good payoff, I couldn't get that 3-6 or 3-8 or higher. Well, you're going to be able to still get a nice payoff by, saying, hey, well, at least, I'm getting Patriot, and it's going to buff these on reveal cards that, got leached. So again, I liked this deck. I thought that it had some pretty good results. Ravonna, also really good synergy with Sage. So that way you can actually have some pretty interesting turns where basically if you have Ravonna earlier, you can play your Mystique, and a little bit earlier, sometimes you can play it in combination with other cards, so that way you can kind of empty your hand before you get wrecked by Leech. But again, did have some fun with this deck. But I honestly, again, if you're asking me, would I rather play, something like this or something like the Greedy Sage list? I'd probably just play the Greedy Sage list. But this is, again, just a really good use of Mockingbird, in my opinion, because obviously you've got Mysterio as well that's filling up some lanes, giving you that 0 power. So that way you can get another trigger off of your Sage. And when you look at Wasp, again, it's got synergy with Patriot, it's got synergy with Sage. And again, it's just an extra card that you can use to, get some power on the board, and it doesn't cost any mana/energy. Now, moving on to what was personally, I think this is probably my favorite list that I got to play with, and I'll kind of take you through some different reasons why I like this. So number one of the big things that I noticed in playing this deck is that you're going to be able to surprise your opponent with the amount of power that you can put on with Iron Man. Iron Man is one of those cards that just steals games, and you could probably switch out some cards in this deck. You could maybe try to fit in a Ravonna. I personally, I don't know how you would fit it in there. Maybe you could take out a Nightcrawler, but Ravonna might be able to something that you could add. But again, when you take a look at this deck, basically Hood is going to give you power, right, in that 6 demon drop. It's also going to give you another. It's going to give you another number that is going to hopefully trigger your Sage. And then you've got Bast as well. That's going to be able to pump up every card in this deck except Mysterio, which, again, it's going to get copies that are going to get pumped. So kind of a trade-off there, right? But Bast, one of the things that you might notice is, well, hey, if I have Bast and it's got a bunch of 3 powers now, how does my Sage work? Well, you're going to have a lot of attack value that's going to change, right? Like Kitty Pryde is going to change in attack value. Angela is going to change in attack value. Mysterio, obviously, it's usually going to be 3. Bishop, it's going to change in attack value. So you're not going to have too many times where you're like, dang, I've got too many 3 powers. My Sage isn't going to grow that much. And generally speaking, the trade-off of getting your Bast to trigger and increase the attack is going to outweigh that 2 power that you would have gotten off the Sage trigger, right? So again, this deck, it could put out some really big numbers. One of the things that I did not like about it is that I felt like I had no counterplay to these combo decks, like, the Tribunal counter decks. I felt like I didn't really have any counters to, the Hela decks. I was just, basically saying, hope I can put out more power with my Iron Man, stealing one lane and, maybe my other lane that I stack, right? So that's one of the things that I really, didn't like about this deck. But again, it felt fun. It felt, it kind of felt like an old school bounce deck for once, But again, when you take a look at the on reveals, a lot of the time you're going to want to play your on reveals before that turn 4 or on that turn 4, so that way Leech doesn't impact you too much. And hey, that's you're gonna get some cards hit by Leech, no doubt. But hopefully, you're able to kind of play around it and set your cards up to where, hey, maybe you play out your cards, and then you don't have priority, so you get leeched, and then you're able to falcon your stuff back and still trigger it again. That was another fun thing too with Sage, is I was able to beast back my Wolfsbane and get some more triggers. And again, because remember, I was playing Wolfsbane in place of Sage. Also, it felt like I was getting a lot of triggers off of Sage or / Wolfsbane, right? It felt like the power was different in a lot of those lanes, and I was able to get in theory, I was able to get some pretty big Sage numbers. Okay, this one, the Clog Sage deck. Now, this one was really, really interesting. And also, there are always some cards that you could substitute. Let me kind of go over a couple of cards and reasons why I chose them. So first of all, let's go over the trio of White Widow, Ravonna, and Sage. Again, I just think they have really good synergy, and especially when you're trying to clog your opponent, it's really good synergy, especially when you consider the Green Goblin in here as well. And again, if you take a look at the cards that I'm playing, a lot of these cards, I'm trying to play them before I get leeched or the turn that I could get leeched. So if I get leeched turn 4, by then the game should have a good direction where I've already used my Green Goblin, or I've already used my Sage to go ahead and try to get some stats on the board, or I'm playing it the same turn that they're playing the leech. And again, when you take a look at this, basically there's some really interesting plays as well where you could play Ravonna early, and then you might be able to play Professor X and Sage in the same turn. And that could potentially steal some lanes. That's assuming if you get some energy buffs from some of the locations, or maybe this goes to a turn 7. So there's some play there. And then also, when you take a look at things like Nebula, what Nebula is doing is basically trying to make your opponent say, hey, I'm going to play cards in that lane or I'm not. And the more cards they play in that lane, the more chances that your Sage gets more value. So again, that's just kind of trying to force your opponent to bottleneck your opponent, say, hey, look over here, look on this lane. And then, you're able to drop a turn 4 Professor X potentially is still a lane. Cards like Squirrel Girl, you may be wondering, well, why are you playing Squirrel Girl? Well, first of all, Squirrel Girl can definitely give you some different power on the board. It also helps feed your Mockingbird, which is a card that if you notice, I'm playing Mockingbird in a lot of these lists. Part of the reason is because Mockingbird, it gets around Shang-Chi. So I'm trying to play cards that don't get just hard countered by, Shang-Chi. I'm trying not to get hard countered by Leech. But at the same time, I'm trying to beat decks like Hela, where I'm basically cutting off one lane, stealing one lane, right? And then I have Iron Man to win another. So again, there's different matchups that you're going to run into, where Professor X is going to be really, really good. Obviously, cards like Jeff is going to be really flexible because it can move around. You can use it to basically trigger your Sage, and then you can move it around as well, so that way it's flexible. It can get into other lockdown lanes. And also when you take a look at cards like Mysterio, again, you're basically getting more cards that feed into Mockingbird. You're getting more cards that feed into Sage, and hey, it's going to be one of those cards that you're going to be able to steal some games because they don't know where the Mysterio is. And then again, Iron Man is the house. You're going to see Iron Man steal some games, especially when you have Ravonna Iron Man. There's potential for you to play Ravonna early, and then Sage and Iron Man in the same turn, right? You might even be able to play 3 cards that turn, depending on how it goes, where your energy is. So again, I really enjoyed playing this deck. I thought that this deck had a lot of nuance to it, and I think that in terms of matchups, Again, when you run into those combo decks, like Tribunal combo, Professor X is not going to feel very good unless one lane is already locked down because of the location, right? Like there's just going to be some matchups that are going to be tough to win. Hopefully you can Green Goblin, hopefully you can White Widow, hopefully you can Iron Man one lane and just try to find ways to steal games. And again, Mockingbird should help in those situations as well, be a lower cost card that you're getting 9 power out of. Now, this last deck to me is actually really interesting as well, because it has the potential to pop off last turn as well and generate a lot of power, but also you can still build up other lanes throughout the game, so that way you can try to shore up 2 locations. And then there's multiple win conditions here. So let's kind of talk through this. So first of all, you got Angela along with the Kitty Pryde. And you've got Angela along with the Hope Summers, Kitty Pryde, and Jeff combo, right? So you've got some synergy going there where you can build up your Angela. At the same time, you can get extra energy with Hope Summers, and at the same time, you can still get extra power with Kitty Pryde and Nebula in other lanes or in that same lane. So again, you're having some synergy there, and then you're basically also having flexibility of Jeff and Professor X. With that extra energy that you're getting from Hope Summers, with that reduced cost of Ravonna, you're able to potentially play Professor X earlier into lanes that may be able to be stolen from your opponent, so that way you can lock down one location. And then you can have Iron Man come in at the end of the game. You can Iron Man Havoc, into a lane that has some power already, and potentially still another lane because they didn't see, the Iron Man Havoc combo coming down. So again, when I take a look at this list, Sage is one of those cards where, you could potentially have a 1-cost Havoc, right? A 2-cost Sage coming down at the end of the game, and really swinging a game in a couple of different locations. Also, again, you notice there's that synergy, right? You got that White Widow, Green Goblin, Ravonna synergy. And also you'll notice Leech is not destroying this deck, right? You're not getting destroyed by Leech because, you didn't play your Sage before turn 4, but you should have the opportunity to play the Sage before turn 4. And again, Hope Summers is just one of those cards that's going to help you get more energy to play other cards in combination with Ravonna, with Kitty Pryde, with Jeff. You've got some good synergy there. So again, this is probably one of the decks that I think has a lot of potential to be really fun. And, again, to sum things up, do I think that you should go buy Sage? I think if one of these decks has piqued your interest, then hey, maybe spend some keys, maybe test it. If you're still on the fence, again, play Wolfsbane in place of Sage, see how you like it. We have time. You don't have to make this decision for a few days. You have time to test. And this is one of those rare occasions where we have a card that's very similar, and you can kind of run through your head the scenarios where Sage would have been better, or sometimes there's going to be times where Wolfsbane is actually better as well. So, hope you guys enjoyed the content. Until next time, I'll catch you later. Peace.